Today's collectible spot, we are having a look at the Hot Toys Batman v Superman MMS 343, the Sideshow Exclusive Superman. One of the perks of getting this as the Sideshow Exclusive is that you actually get a glow light up shard or large chunk of kryptonite, which is really super cool. Spot will put the link down below if you guys are interested in picking this guy up over at the folks over at Sideshow Collectibles. As for your box art, the front of the box features the same chainmail style design as Superman's costume itself, featuring the original Superman logo on the front and Superman across that. Behind that, you see a cityscape with Superman floating up in the skyline area, as well as within the Superman logo, you can see an image of Superman there, along with the Superman amongst the crowd. For your back of the box, you've got your warning choking hazard. Small parts, not for children under 3 years of age. It's an adult collectible. It's not a toy. It's recommended for ages 15 and up. With this also being a shoebox style, you can take the front box flap off, and inside you've got an image of Superman. It appears, though, based on the cutoff there, that this might actually be an image of the figure itself and not of Henry Cavill's Superman. Superman MMS, or MMS 343, 1/6 scale collectible figure of Superman. You've also got the cast and crew responsible, including the head painter E. Lee and head sculptor H.K. Kim. With that being said, Spot's going to take himself a break. I'm going to get this opened up, and when we come back, we're getting a better look at the Hot Toys Batman v Superman MMS 343, the Sideshow Exclusive Man of Steel. Before I hand you away, guys, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Of course, like what we do on this channel, before we have a look at the 6-scale figure release of Superman, we'll have a look at the display stand that comes included with the figure. And I really love this display stand. It's a little bit larger than a conventional standard display stand, which would be only about yay big or so. The flooring is almost more of a stonework flooring. There's a slot at the top that will have the adjustable post. I'll show you that in a second. On the front of the display stand, on the front placard, you've got an raised, I should say, font saying Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice and Superman down below that. I do really like this display stand quite a bit. It's not big. I heard some people saying that the stand is a little on the large side. It's really it's not that much bigger than like one of the deluxe sized figures. It's certainly not a very towering display stand. I would admit it's maybe on the little wider side, but it's really not all that big. The symbol here, the Batman Superman symbol, has a nice red, almost red transitioned airbrush effect, where the center area of the Superman symbol is more the red color, and it almost spreads itself out to a more darker color of the Batman emblem. What you can also do too is just kind of get your finger, in there, because you can raise this up, and you can get yourself a more 3D effect, which is very, very cool. There's the back of it. That's kind of how everything kind of tabs itself together. It's not really much holding the symbol up necessarily, but it's enough certainly if you had Superman. Now, standing him on it, you could theoretically stand him behind the symbol, and I guess there's still a footing area there where his feet could stand on. But I guess this is more suited if you want to have Superman levitating with the provided post. Yes, because also included, folks over at Hot Toys give you the adjustable, flexible neck suited for having the Man of Steel flying. And couple that with the waist clip that also comes included with it. Well, then you can actually have the Man of Steel flying, which is a really nice look for him. Eventually, when I do get the Batman, you'll have to kind of imagine the Batman where my hand currently is. I might end up just displaying him like this, have Superman towering over him in flight, and have the Caped Crusader down below ready to battle him. Now, before we get a closer look at Superman, let's look at why this is the Sideshow Exclusive. Well, that's because of this little guy right here. You get yourself a very large chunk of kryptonite included with the Sideshow Exclusive. It does take batteries, and luckily the folks over at Sideshow do include batteries. I did actually have to change out the batteries. And one thing I wanted to show you, I have my screwdriver right here. For starters, it's a little harder to get it because they don't give you a screwdriver included. So I'm just going to take the screw out for a second. And let's see if we can pop the lid off here. There we go. Inside, there is your batteries. Again, the batteries are included. You don't have to worry about changing or buying those immediately. One thing, though, that will be problematic is getting the batteries in there. If you even have a normal-sized finger, sometimes getting batteries in a very small, narrow crevice like that can be a little on the difficult side. But at least it's something in case where you don't need the batteries right off the bat. And we'll go ahead and just put the screw back in there, and we'll tighten it back up. The switch, much like the screw, is almost hard to spot. The switch is actually right there. Hopefully you can see it or there. It's right there. And you can flick it on once the batteries are in place. And you can see how bright that kryptonite lights up. The outer shell, it looks like it's a translucent green plastic. And then on the inside, it looks like there's almost a little tube that lights up. It's a very successful effect, especially the fact that it looks complete all the way around. Sure, the underside, you can now see the screw, you can now see the switch, and it's a little more on the flatter side, but it does look at least complete. At least on a sculpted level, it looks complete all the way around. And it's extremely bright as well. In fact, cutting the lights, you can even see how bright it is with the lights off. I mean, it's pulsating. It's not necessarily pulsating, but it's a very bright white light. I'm assuming it to be bright white inside the green shell, but it does look radioactive in hand. So let's go ahead and look at Superman. Let's see how well he turned out. Spot had already picked up the Man of Steel from Hot Toys when he was released years ago. And I think this is a nice update. I don't feel as if, though, that this is a straight replacement. I would not necessarily, if picking up, say, said figure here, I don't know if I would necessarily still get rid of a Man of Steel. The Man of Steel was a very different design in itself, and perfect taken from that movie source material. This Superman, while he still carries very similar aspects to him, is very much his own entity. For a better comparison, we have the Superman from Batman v Superman over here. And on this side, the Superman from Man of Steel. They are very similar in design to one another. Probably the more glaring noticeable difference between the two is that this Superman, which was an issue with the initial release of him, is just so much taller than, first of all, other 6-scale figures that really should be in scale. Hot Toys noted the fact that this figure was just too much taller. It should have been a little bit shorter. Other than that, though, it does share very similar comparisons between symbol-wise, the little chevrons or details on the side. But one is very different from the other. Let's have a look at their faces. Both Superman figures do bear striking resemblances to Henry Cavill, who portrayed the Man of Steel in both releases, both movies. But they are different. They are different in the sense that, while the faces are similar, it seems like Henry Cavill's face is a much more slender face in the Batman v Superman release versus the Man of Steel, where he had a much fuller face. And even then, he didn't have necessarily a fuller face. The hair also is a big glaring difference between the two. I personally really liked Man of Steel's look of Superman, where he had a longer hairstyle. Though Batman v Superman, they opted to they gave Henry Cavill a more cleaner look of what Superman would look like. So a little less rough, I guess, in his hairstyle, and giving something a little bit more clean cut. The hardest part when it comes to Hot Toy releases is, as soon as you pretty much pick up one, right around the corner, they may release a second one. And as quickly as we are getting the Batman v Superman Superman here, it's a good possibility that with the Justice League, we might get another release of Superman even still after that. This is, though, one case where I'm not going to get rid of this guy. This guy still looks doesn't look outdated. He looks very much like he did in the movie itself. Figures, when you start looking at closer, like Captain America and a lot of like the Marvel released properties, it seems so often that we are getting newer versions and newer versions of them that it's kind of harder to stay with an updated look to the character unless you kind of group them by category. So Captain America from Winter Soldier is in his own display versus Captain America from Avengers Age of Ultron, Captain America Civil War. As those figures release, it's harder and harder to kind of get a consistent figure because you're always looking to get the next release after that. For that reason, I would still keep both Supermans. Both Supermans do something very different than the other one did. This one I don't feel is updated or outdated at all. I think it still looks a lot like Superman. It's not where I'm looking at this one versus this one and thinking, this one looks really outdated. Not at all, actually. In fact, the only thing I would critique for the older Man of Steel Superman release is simply his cape. His cape just didn't feel very free-flowing, very realistic. This cape, on the other hand, is a far superior addition. Yes, I would say the cape is the biggest asset of this Superman release. It has just a free-flowing drop to it. It drops very naturally, and it flows exactly how a cape should flow. For one reason or another, it does feel heavy too. Like the bottom cape or just the cape as a whole, the material that they've opted with just feels like it sits heavier, if that makes any sense at all. Comparing that to the Man of Steel Superman cape, well, that cape didn't feel as if it could flow naturally. And I like how it naturally creases itself around the neck collar, whereas the original Man of Steel seemed to bunch around the neck instead. I guess one of the biggest differences between the Superman suits too, not only color, because the Batman v Superman suit has a much darker blue color versus that of the Man of Steel, which at the time seemed like it was already a darker suit than what we saw before with like a Christopher Reeve design. The Batman v Superman, though, does make this look a lot lighter in comparisons, but even those little side accent details, the original Man of Steel opted for more of a black or dark gray design, whereas the Batman v Superman opts now for a lighter, almost metallic blue design. As well as the belts on the front, if you want to call it belts, the more circular shaped buckle, if you want to call it a buckle on the front of Man of Steel, now changed to a more square or rectangular design for Batman v Superman, which I kind of still think I like the more rounder shape personally rather than the rectangular. The Superman emblem also is very different from one another. I feel like this one also kind of went the route of giving us like the Richard Donner designed emblem, whereas now this one here is a much wider, less rounded shapes and more opting for something straight and angular. But this video really isn't going to be just a comparison between what he looks like now in this release of the Batman v Superman versus the Man of Steel. Let's get a better look and spend more time on this release. The face here on the new Superman is quite nice. Still missing the Superman curl just a little bit, but I do like at least that they give you a slight curl, and I even feel like near the end of the movie when he's fighting Doomsday, they kind of give him a little bit of a curl near the end of that. One thing I have to find or point out with mine, I've got a little bit of residual. I don't know if it's actual paint or it's just a little bit of something that was left over from when you get it out of packaging, there's a little plastic section that covers across the neck, and I feel like that has left a little bit on Superman's neck, and I can't gauge. It looks like it could be just a little bit of adhesive. Yeah, it's just a little bit of an adhesive, which I'm going to try my best to take off without doing any damage to the neck. Taking that completely out of the way, because I mean that's only relating to my figure. I like also that the coloring, it's a little on the dark side. But I mean, Superman has a more tanned complexion in the movie. It's not a very light tone on Superman, and I think it translates here on the figure as well. They've given a slight wetness to the eyes too, given it life versus giving that, a matte paint. I like that. I like also that the way that the cape tucks better in the collar here on this release rather than the Man of Steel. The collar also is a little more refined. The Man of Steel was a little broader, so they've opted to trim that back, less more stark dark lines, and instead opting for minimal lines instead. The Superman emblem, let's bring the camera back a little bit here. They've added a lot more detail too to the costume. Not Hot Toys necessarily, but the designers that designed the suit for Superman or Batman v Superman. And now they've incorporated not only this chainmail, which was always really there predominantly in the suit anyways, but now they've incorporated additional, almost like scroll work or almost like additional tribal, I guess Kryptonian scripture across the chest area there. It goes right across the symbol. You can see it curves ever so slightly, and it also covers over or runs around the band of the shoulder area there too. Some nice little additional touches. And certainly this is not a Superman costume that was necessarily designed and made by his mother. No, in fact, this is a suit that, again, represents hope. This is something that a Kryptonian on this planet would have acquired, representing the symbol and really just the design of what, Krypton would have represented. And then on the back, I'll just flip that up there, flip the cape up there for a second. One singular zipper running down the side there. Again, you've got that additional, I want to say metallic blue. It's very, very light metallic blue running down the sidelines. That's the only thing that I find is a little jarring about the design of the costume. Not necessarily Hot Toys release of him, but that he had all this additional blue. I don't know if I still like it. I guess it kind of breaks it up from being so dark blue, because a lot of this costume is very dark blue. You got the dark red. The cape is a lot less, a lighter red, like in previous incarnations of Superman, and now it's more of a darker cranberry red. That also carries over down to his boots as well, which, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the boots. For everything I like about the costume itself, the one thing that slightly bothers me about the 6-scale release of Superman is his feet. What they've done is they've applied over, the boots are less rubber and just seemingly part of the material, but because there's like a little dividing cut between the lower foot and the actual calf or lower leg area. There's a gap right there. And it seems like the material of the boot is catching inside that little slot, that little open creviced area. It would certainly depend on what material, when you look at this, you would perceive this to be. If the material was similar in design to the rest of the costume, then theoretically any bend to Superman's foot would also show a crease in that area as well. Now let's say if you compare it to the original Christopher Reeve costume, well, the suit was more of a rubber boot, so that's why you wouldn't see a lot of the little creases. It wouldn't be until Superman would be bending or crouching that you'd be seeing those creases. That being said, I feel like the crease, though, is a little too predominant, that a lot of times I find myself adjusting the leg just to kind of fill that slot in so it's not as obvious. Now, other than the kryptonite that we've already had a look at, Superman also comes with other accessories as well. He, granted, will not have the same style of accessories as Batman, where we have additional weapons and whatnot. Instead, Superman swaps most of his additional accessories to hands. A lot of different various shapes of hands. Currently, he's got closed fists, but you can swap them out to any numerous different open palms, partially open hands. He's got more flight hands. He has a total of 6 hands. Counting the 2 that he's sporting, he has a total of 8 hands in total. To go ahead and swap the hands, simply just grab the arm here and wiggle the hand right off. Now, sometimes during the process of it, and this is a good opportunity to show you this, sometimes during that process, you might find that the peg pops out as well. If that ever be the case, usually a lot of times it's very easy because the hands are rubbery, that you can pry the hand out of the socket and pull the additional peg out. If that not be the case, or let's say one of these pegs break, the folks over at Hot Toys got you covered with 2 additional as well. When it comes to Superman's posability, his head is on a ball joint. Just one singular ball joint, as they've opted to have the neck fully sculpted rather than providing an additional sculpt or additional peg ball joint there. Makes sense. I wouldn't want them to break this up. As for the shoulders hinge forward and back. Not really all that limited by his suit. His suit does seem to have a little more flexibility. To not say, though, that the original Man of Steel suit was restricting, it certainly was not the case at all. As a rotation in the bicep, a double hinge on the elbow, a rotation and hinge on the individual hands. Upper torso does have a crunch, as well as a rotation left and right. One little bit of caution, though, is I wouldn't rotate this too much. Not only does it give the suit a more wrinkled look, but in addition to that, I'm also worried with the little sides, as if they were applied over top of the existing fabric material, any sort of motion back and forth could find these separating from the material. I don't know if that be the case, but just a little bit of caution I think should be made. As for his legs do separate, but not really all that much. That's about more of the restrictions in regards to the articulation. His legs don't really move out all that much. You do get slightly a forward and back motion, but it's certainly not the more freedom that you have with the arm areas. He has a double hinge knee. I guess to some extent, he doesn't have a rotation on the lower foot because this is all one continuous fabric, but he does have a rotation in the foot itself, as well as a rock on the underside too. Some really nice details, something that didn't necessarily need to be there. The Man of Steel's was completely flat. They've gone at least as far as to texture in additional treading on Superman's boots. Spot really does love the new Batman v Superman design. Turned out really good. Hot Toys did a great job on it. It's kind of really the next elevated step of evolution to what this guy was here. But by no means do I degrade the value or just what was done here. This is still a great looking figure. This figure I will still keep. I'll still display it with the General Zod, and I'll kind of pair them in a Man of Steel style of diorama. This guy, on the other hand, well, this guy's going to be set aside for when the Hot Toys initially releases, or when they do eventually release, the upcoming Armored Batman, and respectively the regular Batman release as well. Both figures are great. This figure I still love to this day. It doesn't feel outdated at all, but this figure is really awesome. If you guys are interested in picking this guy up for yourself, Spot will put the link down below to Sideshow Collectibles. Not only can you get this guy with installment plans, so if you can't initially afford the guy right out front, just pay him in installment plans. Do what I do. Pay him in installment plans, and then when you're eventually paid off everything, Superman can come home to you. More importantly as well, if you get this guy through Sideshow Collectibles, you can get this guy as the Sideshow Exclusive. Let's go ahead and flip it on, which will also give you the light up kryptonite, which is a nice touch. Not maybe something that Superman's going to dig, but something that a collector's going to dig, especially when you eventually get Batman. Today's collectible spot, we were having a look at the new Superman from the Batman v Superman line. This was the Hot Toys 6-scale release of him, and this was also the Sideshow exclusive as well. Stay tuned, guys. Spot's going to have more collectible spots heading your way. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.